Hi, everyone. My name is Amit Khandelwal. I've taken almost 11 hours flight from India to be here to talk for this session, and really glad to be doing that. I am the principal product manager working for Microsoft, leading SQL Server and Linux technical strategy. Pretty excited to be here, and my co-speaker, fortunately, unfortunately, is my manager. So if you have those tough questions, please keep it them, and then we'll get to them as well at the later point of time. Over to you, Tejas.
Hey folks, my name is Tejas. I'm the principal PM manager in Azure SQL org. There are a couple of different businesses I lead, and one being Azure SQL migration tooling, but SQL Server on Linux business is very close to my heart. I've been leading this business for the last 6 years. I've been growing this, grooming this to become a success that it is now. And we have worked very hard to make sure that we improve. We do great in this ecosystem to provide you what you need, so you can be successful in using this solution. So I'm just, we are just glad here to be here. To present what we have done so far, and hopefully we can get some questions as well, and we can also learn something more.
Perfect. And in case if you have questions, even after the session, related to SQL Linux or containers, feel free to send us an email or just send us a connect on LinkedIn, and we'll be more than happy to kind of answer any questions that you might have. With that said, I think it's time for us to get to the agenda. And as you might see, we've got a pretty loaded session. And what we want to do with this session is to kind of give you all the input that there is around how you can not just get started, but how you can also go ahead and move your workloads in production with SQL Server on Linux. So the idea here is to let you know that there are customers already who've been doing this, who've started working with this, and they've started running their main workloads, the primary workloads on SQL Server and Linux and containers. So it's no more a sci-fi lab that's running somewhere and very little people have access to it. It's no more of that sort at this point of time. And the takeaways that we have at the end is basically those reference architectures, those configurations that we've built with SQL Server and Linux that spans OLTP workloads as well as the analytical workloads as well. So with that as the agenda, let's dive right in, and let me start with the overview. So Tejas, would you want to give us a quick overview of what SQL Server on Linux containers is, how people can get started? And by the way, is this the same SQL Server, or is this a different SQL Server?
Absolutely. So SQL Server on Linux, the very first question I typically get whenever I bring this up to the customers is that, is it different? What is going on over here? And I'm glad to tell everybody that SQL Server on Linux is the same SQL Server. In fact, the same binary that's running on Windows. What we have done is we created a very thin interpretation layer for some system calls, and that's all. Wherever the SQL Server interacts with the operating system, we just created a very thin interpretation layer to translate all of that into Linux calls, and it just works. Same SQL Server binary that runs on Windows runs on SQL Server on Linux. And it's so nicely structured that we can support multiple operating systems. So for example, SQL Server on Linux is supported on 3 major Linux operating systems. Ubuntu, SUSE Linux Enterprise, and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It's fully supported on all 3 Linux operating systems. And yes, we know that some of our customers also run it on Debian, CentOS, and a whole lot of other distributions as well. It does work. While we don't validate it and we don't support it, but we know that many of our customers use it on some of the other distributions as well. But we do continue to work with our partners at all 3 distributions to make sure that we support all the latest versions as well. For example, we just launched SQL Server 22 support for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9 as well as Ubuntu 22.04. And we will keep updating all our SQL Server versions which are available on Linux to the latest distributions wherever possible. Okay? Now, when it comes down to features, almost all the features that you are used to, every engine feature, the QP is the same. It's a same storage engine. The layout is the same. And in fact, it's funny. Actually, last night, I was looking at LinkedIn for one of my ex-colleague who had posted an article about how if you go from with certain DBMS, if you change cross-platform, you may have to worry about code pages and the type of data storage, and you may have to pull out the data, translate the data, and push it back. Nothing like that. It's the same SQL Server. So, if you run it on Windows, you can actually take it from Windows and run it on Linux. It just works. So,
and to be honest, just to ensure that you don't steal the thunder out of my slide, I just want to basically show you that this SQL Server engine is basically the same engine that runs on Windows, containers, and Linux. Just bear with me on one slide, and I can actually show that to you, and you'll be mesmerized, because all you've got to do is just move the database. Don't worry of the ecosystem that's running behind it, and all of that just works out of the box. Now, if you're someone who's looking to get the packages, if you're someone who wants to work with the SQL Server packages on VMs and bare metal, you can get that for, like they just mentioned, you can get that for RHEL, for Ubuntu, for SLES. You can run it on your own options of operating systems like CentOS and others, but those are not the tested distributions. The tested and recommended distributions are Ubuntu, RHEL, and SLES. And if you're looking for containers, we have the Microsoft Container Registry. We have container images built for Ubuntu. We have container images built for Red Hat UBI-based OS, and you can get it from there as well.
And here is the thing, the container images that we have built are just base images. We allow you to customize it. So, let's talk, we are, after all, in Linux. Everybody customizes their containers. If you customize your containers with additional features, it's still supported. It just works.
Tejas, I'm sorry. While you said everything works, there are some things that still don't work. So I just wanted to also get that slide up here. And this specifically talks about the scenarios which currently don't work for SQL Server and Linux. Now, while I did bring that, I have this small note added here which has a link. And if you open this link, for every feature, or let me correct, for the most of the features that you see aren't supported, there's a workaround that has been provided. For example, link servers to data sources other than SQL Server is not supported. So you cannot create a link server between Oracle and SQL Server on Linux. But you can always use Polybase to actually do that particular job for you. So the idea is, while there are some of these features that do not work, we have them covered. We do not have a customer currently that I'm aware of who's probably blocked on one of these features. So the idea is you're able to go ahead and use these features, even though if it's not available, there is way to kind of move forward to it.
And you just have to take a look at a feed from one of us. We constantly update SQL Server to make sure that we add new features. So over the last maybe 4 or 5 years, how many features have we added?
We've brought the parity at least close to, for SQL database engine, close to 99%.
So, replication, distributed transactions, I mean, you name it, the features that you think didn't work, they do actually work.
Yeah, and the EKM, I have a surprise for all of you at the end. If you thought you could not store SQL Server keys outside of SQL Server, just stay back, and I have a surprise for you to be revealed at the last. With that, I think this is the time for me to show you the power of SQL Server. Could you help me with that demo, if you could just run? So here, on your screens, what you see right now is your old friend SSMS connected to 3 SQL Server instances. Can anyone recognize what this page is? This is your always-on dashboard, right? On this dashboard, I'm connected to 3 replicas. One is a Azure VM running Linux, and it's Ubuntu. No guesses, no prizes for the guess because the name says it. The other one, MSSQL-0, the one which I'm just showing right now, that is basically a container which is running somewhere out in Azure Kubernetes. And the third node that you're seeing here is actually a SQL Server Windows VM, which is running SQL Server on top of it. And did you realize what I've just done? It's one single availability group. I've added these three as replicas. And if you don't trust me, I did run the DMVs. And I just wanted to show you the output here as well, that these are definitely, one of them is a Linux container running in Azure Kubernetes Service. Another one, so this is the Linux container, the MSSQL 0. This is based on the Ubuntu OS. And the second one that I'm going to show you now is basically the Min server Ubu. This is also my MinIO server for my Polybase to work. And as you can see, this is not a container, but just a normal VM that's running in Azure. And the third one is actually a SQL Server on Windows, which was not running on Azure. It was running a Windows 22 data center. So 3 replicas added in one always-on availability group. And this technology was made possible because one of our partners has this clustering stack that works on Windows, containers, and Linux, and that's DX Enterprise. And with this tool, you can actually connect to your availability group, and the failover is like you would do with any external failover. Just right-click. For example, I want to run SQL Server on the container now. I'm just going ahead, right-click, run, start hosting. Did you see what happened? It's basically moving the database from Windows as the primary to the container as the primary right now, and you would see everything syncs up like it is the basic same old always on. So the difference here was just the clustering stack. This clustering stack is not Windows Server failover cluster, but this clustering stack is DX Enterprise that works on Windows and Linux. And like this, we also have other cluster stacks that we support. Pacemaker. We also support HP Service Guard. Are they supported on all distributions? We'll come to that later. But the idea that I want to give is this is the same SQL Server engine at the end of the day. You were able to fail over from one environment to the other without even being bothered, using your same old tools, and you can get started with it. We have customers using this environment right now where their development is all container-based. Their productions are all running on, let's say, OLTP environment is running on SQL Server on Windows. Real time, the data is being migrated and replicated using always on, which is a known technology for everybody. This is being migrated for read-only queries on running on VMs, and they're able to do it. And all of this doesn't look good because of the lighting here, but all of this, can you take a guess how long it took me for me to configure this? Just take a guess. A container, a SQL Server VM running on Linux. Don't add the time for installing SQL Server on Windows. We just exclude that time, but getting availability group and getting all of this set up. Take a guess. Sorry? Oh, we don't talk in hours. We talk in minutes. We talk in seconds right now. So it just took me 10 minutes to actually go ahead and configure this up and running so that I can get started with it. This is? No, the availability group you can configure listener. You're asking about listener, correct? You can configure listener to this as well. This is a completely supported environment, and you have an official documentation available on Microsoft using which you can set this up with listener as well. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Always on is always on. And that was the point that we are trying to make, that SQL Server on Linux is same as SQL Server on Windows. Always on is always on. The functionality remains same. All this functionality is available across the nodes as well. So just works.
Yeah. With that said, it's time for us to also talk about what have we done with Azure and SQL Server on Linux. And this is one thing that Tejas and I, we've had long fights about. And some he wins, some I, but we've been able to do this. So today, if you're on Linux, you could basically run SQL Server on Azure in 2 forms. You could run it as VMs, or you could run it as containers as well. If you're running it as containers, all of these platforms are supported. Azure Kubernetes Service, Azure Red Hat OpenShift, unmanaged Kubernetes cluster. What's an unmanaged Kubernetes cluster? You spin up some VMs on Azure, and then go ahead, create your own Kubernetes cluster. And this cluster could be created using tools like Gardener or Rancher Prime or anything of that sort which manages your Kubernetes cluster. You can get that started, and you can immediately run your SQL Server workloads on those. If you decide to go the VM way, what are the option stages for us?
So if you decide to go the VM way, we offer pre-created images for you. We have pre-created images running SQL Server on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, SUSE Linux Enterprise, as well as Ubuntu Pro. And here is the thing. All those pay-as-you-go images that we have created, they come with full support. When you, Ubuntu, by default, is generally not supported. Ubuntu Pro, you still have to purchase support separately. But when you deploy our image of SQL Server on Ubuntu Pro, you get full support. There is full stack support included in that image. So, and
just to reiterate, full support, not just for SQL Server, full support for SQL Server running on Ubuntu on Azure. So you just call the Azure support, and all of this is included just because you chose to run the Ubuntu Pro image to start with.
Yeah, and well, there are customers that we work with. They prefer to create their own images, and yes, you can perfectly, you are perfectly okay to create your own images and deploy, SQL Server on any VM. That's perfectly valid answer as well. What is this IS extension?
Yes, this is if you go the route where you say, I don't want your images, I don't want your pay-as-you-go images, I want to create my own manual installation. I have my Ansible scripts and I want to use those, or I have my Terraform scripts and I want to use those to deploy the infrastructure. OK, fine. So you can go ahead, deploy the VM, the server, configure it, and now we provide you something called as the IS extension, which is made available for Ubuntu and coming soon for RHEL and for SLES. But if you have those environments running and you want them to be enabled, just talk to us after this session. Let's see what we can do for you. But what does this IS extension give you? This IS extension gives you the ability to manage your license. For example, you want to convert from the current licensing to pay-as-you-go, you could do that. Or vice versa, you could also do that. The idea is, if you look at the IS extension that's available for Windows versus for Linux, you'd see you don't have best practice assessment for Linux. You don't have, let's say, the upgrade management for Linux. What we are happy to inform you is upgrade management is now in preview, Azure Update Manager, which means with one click, you can not only update SQL Server, but also the Linux OS that's running with it. Then the best practice assessment. We've worked with our partners to make the best practice assessment available right with SQL Server and Linux. So you want to run BPA for SQL Server and Linux, you could do that with the SQL Server Assessment API that's made available. And I have a quick demo which kind of shows this to you right now. So let's just take a look. And it's pretty simple. And can you play this? Yeah, I wanted to record all my demos. So all you've got to do is install the PowerShell. And once you have PowerShell installed, so this is probably your central server where you have the PowerShell installed. And then you go ahead and install the SQL Server module like you would for SQL Server on Windows as well. Once you install the SQL Server module, now the target instances that you want to monitor or run the assessment to, create a login using which the assessment API can connect. I'm just creating a login here, giving control server so that it can run the permissions. This login that you've created, you save the password for this login in the Linux machine, the central machine from where you want to go ahead and run your script, your assessment. And what you're doing, what I'm showing you here is that login and the password created here. Right now it's in text, but of course we are going to encrypt that as well. And you can see the file is created. Now this is the file that is going to be used to get the credentials. And we have the PowerShell script made available on our documentation. All you've got to do is run that PowerShell script here, which you can see I'm right now accessing. And it's called as the runassessment.ps1. This is the PowerShell script. Not going to go in detail of each of it, but I have what rules to run. I have what is the credentials, what are the targets. Once you provide those targets, credentials that we just created, it can go ahead, connect to a SQL Server running on container. It can connect to a SQL Server running on VM or bare metal, wherever you have. Once it connects, it goes ahead, runs the assessment, and gives you the data in JSON format, CSV format, or the format of your choice. So all you've got to do here is use this script, provide the credentials to be able to connect to the target, and that's it. You can now run best practice assessment. You've got to go this manual route with Linux for now, but what I'm just saying is with the IS extension, you'll soon see some work happening here as well.
Is the manual step documented?
Yes, thank you. That's why we have managers, don't we? Yes, all of these steps that I just showed it to you, all of this is completely documented and made available so that you can get started with it right now. Perfect. Now, this is just an example of showing the assessment. So right now, the assessment is running because I just ran it under the MS SQL user. And if it just probably takes about a few minutes, depending upon the number of rules.
Yeah.
And then you basically get started with it.
Yeah.
So this is how the JSON format is going to look like if I can play it. Yeah, I can't just move it in there. So at the end, you probably would just see the JSON format. Now, you're all DBAs, right? You're all people who work with data. You're all people who engineer the data to kind of answer questions that you need. And you definitely need those performance tuning knobs or those self-correction. Most of it is taken care. But if you are still one of those who would like to, open the hood and look what is running, what needs to be done, we do that for you as well. And what are some of the performance knobs that we've made available? Tejas, can you talk about these?
So basically, more often than not, when you install a SQL Server on Linux, there are a few things that you would go and optimize. Typically, you would want to, first of all, automate the deployment. Nobody likes to do manual install. Let's face it, it's not the most glamorous part of our job, right? Then once you do all the installation, there are certain configurations that you will want to optimize, especially on the storage and the Linux kernel side of things. Now, this is where things are very interesting because Linux is extremely flexible operating system. It provides you a plethora of options to configure the kernel just right to eke out the most best possible performance. Also, that means that there is a lot of manual work on tweaking and everything for you, right? And post that, there is a SQL Server configuration that you can do to optimize your performance. Well, that's a lot of work. So what can we do here?
That is where we come with the Ansible scripts. We've worked very closely with Red Hat engineering to ensure that we come up with something called as the system roles. Now, what does the system role basically do? It basically does your job. It goes ahead, installs, configures SQL Server, ensures that all these settings that you have, we have something called as the TuneD profile, which has the CPU settings, storage settings, network settings. It basically sets them up correct. And then at the end, if you want to enable encryption, TLS encryption, you want to enable Active Directory authentication, all of that is taken care right away through the Ansible script. So you just create the playbook. And once you have the variables defined, you can go ahead and run this. And not only does it configure individual SQL Server instances, but you can create pacemaker clusters using this specific Ansible script. And the next demo that I have is just to show you how easy this is. And starting Red Hat RHEL 8.5, this system role is part of the operating system. So when you want to install the system role, it's as simple as install system SQL.role. That's all. And then the system role is installed. You set up your playbook XML and define the parameters, and then let Ansible do the configuration, the installation, and the deployment for you while you sit back and probably go get a coffee for yourself. Now, here is one example of the same. So in this demo, I'm actually setting up a cluster, a 3-node cluster with pacemaker using Ansible. And as you can see, I've just defined the host file. You have rel1 test, you have rel2 test, and the quorum server. And all I'm saying is I need rel2 as a synchronous replica, relqs as a witness, the quorum witness, and rel1 as the primary. Once I specify this in the host file, these are my targets where SQL Server will be installed, availability group configured, and pacemaker cluster also created. And again, I define what is the SKU of SQL Server, what's the SA password, what is the, what are the different points in terms of the firewall, the port for always-on availability group endpoint, and of course the virtual IP using which customers will be able to connect. And this is, sir, to your question, basically I'm creating a virtual IP address right here using the Ansible script. And again, just to say that this is not a gimmick, I'm just showing you there's no SQL Server installed here on all these 3 environments. And then we go ahead and run the installation. And how much of a time does it take to run the installation? Again, you would see we finish within less than 20 minutes. We deploy a pacemaker cluster. 3 new SQL Server instances are installed. And this is on VM, not containers, by the way. This is on VM. And finally, we have the pacemaker cluster in high availability mode setup. And all it took me was just provide the path to that XML playbook and then get started with it. This takes about a minute or 2 to kind of complete. And you can see it's going on all targets, confirming whether the installation has been done. And all of this logging is also available, making it easy for you to troubleshoot in case if you need to. We have not seen any problems with that. In fact, this system role is available on Ansible Galaxy. And if you go back and take a look, we update it. When I say we, it's in partnership with the Red Hat engineering team. We update this system role pretty much every 2 months. And we've already had more than 50,000 downloads, or I think 40,000 downloads in less than 6 months. So that's the kind of usage that we are seeing with the Ansible roles. And that's why now it's even a part of the Red Hat operating system by default. That's it. While I was talking, this was all done. SQL Server are installed on all 3 machines. And if I run a status to check, something like a PCS status, you'll see the always-on availability group configured right away. It's showing as a warning because I've not added a database to the AG over here.
Basically, this is your infrastructure as a code in some sense. The initial part or initial time you spent on coding up that XML file, basically, you are just essentially describing your infrastructure in that XML file. And once you are done, you can get coffee, and it will make you look good in front of your management. Trust me, it works.
Yeah, with that, I think I'll just move forward. What are the performance recommendations? All that work the Ansible did, for some reason you say, no, I want to do it manually. All right, you can do it manually as well. Here is a complete documentation that we've published that basically helps you understand what are the different settings, what you should be configuring, what you should be leaving default, and how you can get started with it. In fact, all that performance that Ansible did just now, that what you saw, can be done manually, can be changed, and this is the slide which talks about this. I'm not going to go in what FUA is, why should it be enabled. All of that is very well documented in this link that you have over here. But if you are planning to run OLTP environment with SQL Server on Linux, our recommendation, which is documented as well, please use the XFS file system and use the FUA trace flags to get the best out of your SQL servers.
And trust me, I took painful about month and a half to write this article. Please do read through it. Please do follow it. It will give you better performance and far more stability.
Very subtle way of saying that you did this.
Thank you.
All right, let's talk about business continuity. This is another aspect that I just wanted to spend 2 minutes on before we close. If you compare the Windows clustering stack versus the Linux clustering stack that you have, you can see there are some partners who provide the cluster technology which works on Windows and on Linux. But then there is certain subtle differences. For example, you don't have a WSFC or Windows Server failover cluster for Linux. So that is why you would see we've worked with various other partners out there in the industry, like the HP Service Card, Pacemaker, coming from SLES, coming from Red Hat, coming from Canonical for Ubuntu. We've worked with them and ensured that we have something like a resource DLL for Pacemaker, which is called as the MS SQL Server HA component, agent. We have that which provides the similar, similar functionality like a resource DLL would do, but for Linux. So all of this is again, very well documented, made available over here in this link. And anytime, again, I would just like to reiterate, anytime any of the cluster stack you see or you have a problem or you want to understand more about it, feel free to send us an email. We understand that when you work with Windows Server failover cluster and then coming to a new clustering stack can be challenging. And we are trying our best using scripting, using things that this becomes like a black box for you, so you just worry about SQL Server and high availability and not think about what is running underneath it. So that is the idea. So if you have questions, reach out to us when you're looking at this.
Amit, give me 30 seconds. I really want to go through some of this tech part of it, because this has been a question that's come up in quite a few discussions. Why isn't there a first-party clustering solution for SQL Server on Linux? It's a very common question, and it's a very valid question. So I want to just bring some clarity to that. Even when we are talking about SQL Server on Windows, SQL Server provides always-on availability group, but Windows failover cluster is part of the operating system. SQL Server team does not build that, but it integrates really well with that because, frankly speaking, SQL Server clustering and Windows failover clustering sort of grew up together. Like they are like cousins, and they work so well together that they feel extremely well integrated. There is a reason for that, right? Now, when we brought it over to Linux, well, Linux does not have Windows failover cluster because Linux is not Windows, right? So SQL Server still provides always-on availability group. The overall SQL Server infrastructure is exactly the same. You still have the same code base, you have the same replica model, you have the same AG listeners, everything remains same. But the high availability under the stack provided by operating system, we had to look for partners. We had to look for something that exists on Linux. We found first partner in Pacemaker clusters. We've worked with a lot of our Linux the partners to bring this high availability via Pacemaker cluster. As we started working well in the OSS ecosystem, as it happens in OSS ecosystem, we found additional partners who wanted to work with us and bring additional solutions. So we worked with a partner named DH2I to bring the same high availability solution or the quorum management part of it in Linux, which is provided by DX Enterprise, and it works well with SQL Server. Then we found another partner in terms of HPE, and we have worked really well to provide the same high availability using HPE Service Guard. And if we find more partners, we will continue to work on it. We will make sure that we will provide you great solutions which are out of the box, which are native to the Linux ecosystem, that work really well with Linux ecosystem. It may not be a Windows failover cluster, but it just works well.
Yeah.
We make sure of that.
And in case if you are being bombarded with a lot of clustering stack and you want to take decisions, this is a slide deck that I go the most with when I am with my customers, because you have multiple options. It's your choice to pick and choose. Where are they available? Would they work on containers? Will they work on Linux? Are they only Windows only? Are they specifically only supporting Red Hat and SLES and not any other platform? All of that options, we've made it available in our official documentation, as well as this slide over here should help you make those decisions. Recently, we worked with our partner HP Service Card, and they were good enough for us. They actually went ahead and said, you know what, we'll also support your container workloads. So they built the clustering technology now, which is available with HP Service Guard 15.2, where they support container workloads as well. So you can run SQL Server containers on Kubernetes and use HP Service Guard. If you think, no, I have a scenario where I would probably want it to also be running on Windows, and you want a common platform, common stack, you could go with DH2I, DX Enterprise, because it works on Windows, Linux, containers, Kubernetes, VMs, bare metal, any of those. Or if you think, I have a pacemaker, I have high availability with my distribution, I want to use pacemaker, absolutely, you can go ahead and use that. And pacemaker does not support container workload, so that is why you don't see containers out there. But if you think this is what you need, we support with pacemakers as well. So it's your choice. Based on your ecosystem, based on your environment, you can choose what fits the best for you. And if you need help in choosing this, let us know how we can improve the documentation, or if you want us to do something about it, we can definitely work as well.
But Amit, we just talked about all the deployment and everything. What about monitoring?
Yes, I know those are some of the questions that come up every time. And I just want to let you know that SQL Server is the same SQL Server. So if you have monitoring available right now in your environments with DMVs, with event managers, and all of that, capturing the system logs, all of that works for SQL Server and Linux. Here, I'm just showing you one of the options which one of our customers is using, which is based on the Telegraph Influx Grafana stack, where they have everything of that running in container mode. Telegraph is running in container mode and has this agent which connects to any SQL Server. So this could be a SQL Server managed instance server, SQL Server on Linux, SQL on Windows. Your choice of servers. You could connect. The Telegraph would get the data for you. The agent gets the data for you. The data is stored in FluxDB, which is a time series DB based on the retention period that you define. And finally, the data is shown in a graphical manner using the Grafana, Kibana, or any other tool that you have. So the idea that I want to just show you is this is just one example of how you can do a common monitoring. But the same thing can be done with any monitoring tool that you have today, which depends on DMVs, which depends on the system logs and agents that you basically collect. So all of that is going to work with this.
Amit, is it documented?
Yes, this is also documented and made available here through the blog, as well as in our documentation, the official documentation. Also, this is made available. I did not add that link, but yeah, you caught it. I will add the link to this as well. See, that's why I just don't like presenting with managers.
So, but here is the thing. You might also think of it as, once again, is it a native solution, and why isn't it a native solution? But once again, we are playing in the OSS ecosystem, and we want to be a good partner over there. We want to be a good contributor over there. So we are also working with our partners to build solutions which are scalable and which can be extended to additional solutions as well. And that's why sometimes you will see us creating these solutions that we will document and we'll make sure that it's available to everybody to use and extend. But it may not look as it's Microsoft published or documented. It's simply because we want to be good citizen in OSS ecosystem, and we want to contribute over there.
Yeah, and finally, I did tell you, right? There's a surprise on the EKM part of it. We are very happy to announce that last week we released the AKV converter, the Azure Key Vault connector, not converter, connector. I was just searching for the converter before. We launched the Azure Key Vault connector for SQL Server on Linux, which means you can now, like you would do it on Windows, you can now just go ahead with the same experience, store all your encryption keys to Azure Key Vault. Today, you can just do this with Azure Key Vault. You cannot bring in other HSM modules, but Azure Key Vault is what we've supported first, and this was announced with the CU12 release for SQL 22. So how does that look like? It's exactly how you would see it on Windows, where you basically go ahead, enable the enable the EKM provider through the SP configure. Like you can see, the whole idea is it's the same experience. Even the path using which you're going to load the EKM DLL is C program files because it's embedded into the binary itself. So it's not root/something. It's the same path. And then I'm just going to go ahead, create a credential. As you can see, this credential is basically used to access the Azure Key Vault. And once I access the Key Vault, or once the credential is created, I associate it with a login. And these are all steps that you would do for Windows as well. Nothing changes in terms of experience for a Linux customer, for a container customer, or for Windows customers. Finally, once I go ahead and create the credential and associate it with a login, I create the asymmetric key. I then go ahead and create the login from that asymmetric key so that I can go ahead and enable the TDE encryption. And I'm dropping SA because it's not good to use SA, right? You need to use a normal login. So I just go ahead, do that. I drop the credential with SA, bring it with the new login that we created, and then go ahead and run the encryption for the database. Wow, I can speak faster than what I do. So here, in a moment, you would see this change. There you go. Yeah. So I'm creating the database encryption key, which is based on the AKV, the key stored in AKV, and there you go. I'm enabling the encryption. And when I look at the state, the TempDB and the database is now encrypted with the key stored outside. So this is now available with SQL Server 22 on Linux.
Amit, is this documented?
No, not yet. This is going to be documented pretty soon. We just released CU12. So, and I was on the plane with you.
Just checking, just checking.
But that said, this is soon to be documented, and you should have this available. But you can use the same documentation that you have for SQL on Windows for now. With that said, last thing that I want to leave all of you with, I told you that there are customers who've been using this. These are some reference architectures that we've worked with our partners and created, where you can see we are using data analytics. We've also been able to run containers in a scale-up versus scale-up versus scale-out deployment models. And we were able to get 8 million TPMs right out of the box without any tuning. We've also gone ahead and published the latest TPCC benchmark with SQL Server 22 on RHEL 9, which has been published for all of your references. And we've had previous benchmarks for SQL 2019 on RHEL 8 as well. I think we also have one for RHEL 7 also with SQL 2017. So every new release of the distribution or of SQL Server, we work with partners, we release the TPCC benchmarks, and here are some. And just an FYI, SQL on Linux just does not run on Earth. It also runs in International Space Station. So this is where we've been working with customers. And if someone want the link for the particular blog, I can share that as well. So that is not documented. So with that, I think that's all we have. Please do give us feedback. We'd love to know how we can do better. And if it's a documentation feedback, just give it to me, because this feedback reaches to him. So if it's this documentation feedback, I'd love to hear that. But again, if there are any other questions, I think we have 5 more minutes, so open for questions now. Yes?
Well, maybe just some basics. First of all, if you have a database, or the same database on Linux or on Windows, and I have the same query, will I get the same query plan?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, let me just repeat the question. So the question is, if I have a database on Linux and on Windows, and if I run the same query, would that give me the same query plan on both Linux and Windows? The answer to that is yes, it should.
Provided you have the same
resources.
Same resources.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, because it's the same SQL engine. So everything is going to be the same, so the plan is also going to be the same.
Then my next question is, I mean, the content of data or the data source is one thing, but the organization, I mean, the structure around the database might be complicated, because in larger organizations, I have always an Active Directory server. That means everything is managed by the Active Directory server. So how does it work with Linux
Okay.
system on it? Because let's say you do have an Active Directory account or a group. How does it work? I mean, you do have an replication.
Yes.
But
Yeah. If I may summarize that question, can I say that your question is, if I have Active Directory in my environment, would that work seamlessly with SQL Server on Linux in terms of the accounts, the Windows authentication, the group authentication that we basically do? And the answer to that question is yes. We fully support Active Directory authentication for SQL Server and Linux with groups, with users. You could just go ahead, connect as a Windows authentication. Next time, probably what I'll do is I can show you a demo of that as well. And you saw the Ansible script that I had. You can use that to also join your machine to the Active Directory and also configure SQL Server to use Active Directory authentication. So it's absolutely supported, fully supported.
the one part is policies.
Yes.
Active Directory and policies that might definitely apply. And these are not only our business from the DBA
Yes.
side, it's also the organizational part from other
Yes.
departments that
Yeah.
say, hey, you have to have these policies. Does it work?
Yes. So yes and a no. So the policies is work in progress, especially the check password and check expiry policies. That's work in progress. And you should see some news very soon on that. Like we did something with AKV. We are also trying to do something with that. And you should see something on that as well. But right now, that's work in progress. But the other part of the Active Directory, all the other policies that you might have on the group level, on the login level, all of that applies, all of that works. Only the part where we check for the password expiry or we check for the, the password policy, that currently doesn't work. So that is work in progress. Yeah, the question here is, can I, when I enable Active Directory authentication, I want to create a new login, can I use SSMS to browse the login and just connect to it? If that is the question, answer yes, absolutely. You can do that starting SQL 2019 or 2017 as well.
Yeah, SQL Server Management Studio works with
Yes.
SQL on Linux. It just works.
Yes. Yeah. In terms of differences, we support RHEL 9, we support Ubuntu 22.04. We also support the latest features with SQL Server 22. So there are good differences. All of that, what is there, is supported here.
Well,
No. We could.
as far as we know, even the S3 support works,
Yes.
even the polybase works.
Yes.
So we actually have goodness. Most of the scenarios actually just work.
There's nothing that does not work with SQL Server 22,
The one thing.
which was working with SQL 2019. So
Yeah.
most of them that does work with
What about the Active Directory
Entra ID authentication.
Entra ID authentication?
Yes. For the Entra ID authentication, it works with, okay, okay. Entra ID authentication, if you're having SQL servers running on Azure, Entra ID authentication does not work in that environment. But you have SQL Server on Linux running on-prem, Entra ID authentication works for that. If you have SQL Server running on containers, Entra ID authentication does not work at this point of time. So 2 places where the latest Entra ID authentication does not work for SQL on Linux is containers and on Azure. But if you have it on VMs or bare metal on-premises, it works.
Okay. We have a question over there.
Yeah.
Same day.
Thank you for this question. I'll just repeat the question here. The question is, what is the latency between the patch that appears for SQL on Windows versus SQL on Linux? And the answer is 0. The day the patch is released for Windows, that same day it's released for Linux as well. And for all distributions, including container images.
I think we are at time, so we'll have to close it. But we are available, outside, and we are available at the booth as well. Please come and talk to us if you want to learn more, and we love your questions. Please come and ask me more questions.
Yes.
Ask us more questions. I'll redirect most of them to him anyway.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.